From the St. Louis Public Radio Newsroom, this is The Gateway. It's Tuesday, September 2nd. I'm Abby Larico. The former head of Illinois' National Guard calls the prospect of President Trump sending Guard members into Chicago to combat crime a terrible misuse of the force.
The core mission is the defense of the United States of America in battling overseas adversaries. It's not in providing domestic law enforcement.
St. Louis Public Radio's Will Bauer speaks with former Adjutant General of Illinois and Democratic Congressman Bill Enyart, coming up after this news on The Gateway. Hundreds of Missourians rallied yesterday against a special session to redraw the state's congressional lines and to severely restrict the initiative petition process, making it harder to amend Missouri's constitution. St. Louis Public Radio's Jason Rosenbaum reports that some rallygoers see the move as a sign of desperation for the GOP.
Governor Mike Kehoe called a special session last week to transform Democratic Congressman Emanuel Cleaver's Kansas City-based district into a GOP-leaning seat. He also wants to require constitutional amendments to pass statewide and in all 8 congressional districts in order to be enacted. Webster Grove's resident Leslie Enyart says the fact Kehoe pushed for the special session shows Republicans know the 2026 midterms aren't going to go well for them.
Clearly, if you have to do that, it's because the people would like something else.
Lawmakers will convene in Jefferson City on Wednesday afternoon. The special session is expected to last through the middle of September. I'm Jason Rosenbaum, St. Louis Public Radio.
Applications are now available to give St. Louis residents whose homes suffered severe damage in the May 16th tornado a break on their property taxes. A law passed earlier this year means that the taxes will only be levied for the time a person was able to live in their house. For some people, that could mean hundreds of dollars in relief. A city tax board will begin reviewing applications this month. Interim Assessor Sean Ordway says its members will take into account the fact that some people could not afford an alternate place to live, even if their home was badly damaged.
If somebody's living in a tent or living in their car, they're certainly not occupying the building. That seems to be pretty clear. If it's somebody who's just decided to stay there, I don't know how the board is going to rule on those.
Applications are available on the assessor's website and are due by October 1st. The deadline to apply for FEMA disaster aid for the May 16th tornado has passed, but city officials say the efforts to get federal assistance should continue. St. Louis Public Radio's Olivia Mizell reports.
Last week, FEMA rejected Mayor Kara Spencer's request to extend the deadline for disaster aid. But Chief Recovery Officer Julian Nix is still encouraging impacted residents to apply late for the next 60 days.
And I'd say they should act as if the deadline was extended by 60 days from all intents and purposes, go apply. And then we will see and try to work with FEMA to understand who's applying late.
FEMA representatives at disaster recovery centers are still helping residents fill out applications and submit documents. People who received a rejection letter from FEMA should read it carefully. You can likely appeal your decision, and your letter will detail what documents to submit to complete the appeal. I'm Olivia Mizell, St. Louis Public Radio.
St. Louis Mayor Kara Spencer says she regrets telling people not to self-deploy in the immediate aftermath of the May tornado. Community members have said they had to self-deploy after the tornado because help was not arriving. Spencer says she should have worded the request differently.
The night of the tornado, we were asking folks to stay home that night, and primarily because, we had a lot of gawkers, disaster gawkers, that were just clogging up our roads and gawking at people's misfortune.
She also says turmoil in the federal government left St. Louis to respond to the disaster alone. Spencer reflected on the first 100 days after the tornado on St. Louis on the Air. You can hear more of that interview now in the show's podcast feed or at stlpr.org. A group of teachers and staff from the Clayton School District began their weekend by helping remove tornado debris from a neighborhood where some of their students live. St. Louis Public Radio's Hiba Ahmed stopped by and has this report.
Over 70 staffers reported to the Academy neighborhood just north of Delmar Boulevard to help cut down weeds and stack piles of bricks. The neighborhood is home to some of the district's students who participate in the voluntary desegregation program. It was also badly damaged by the May 16 tornado. Wyandotte Middle School librarian Erica Harris says she was surprised by how the aftermath of the storm has stayed with her students.
When I met students like rising sixth graders who had been fifth graders, who talked about their experience in the tornado and how even when the sky gets cloudy now, they get nervous. That for me was kind of eye-opening.
The district helped support 50 families who were impacted by the storm. I'm Heba Ahmed, St. Louis Public Radio.
Labor Day is now behind us, and if that has you mourning the end of summer, here's something you might want to consider when you're planning for next year. Direct flights from St. Louis to Europe will be more frequent next summer. Lufthansa Airways announced yesterday service between Lambert St. Louis International Airport and Frankfurt, Germany will increase to 5 days a week, June through October 2026. That trip is currently flown 3 days a week. In a statement, Airport Director Rhonda Hamnabrigi says passenger demand has remained high since the route's launch in 2022, and this service increase reflects that. This is the only direct flight to Europe from St. Louis. As President Trump threatens a federal deployment to Chicago to combat crime, the former leader of Illinois' National Guard is admonishing that prospect. Also a former Democratic congressman, Bill Enyart led the state's National Guard from 2007 to 2012. St. Louis Public Radio's Will Bauer asked the former Adjutant General of Illinois what he first thought when he learned of the president's plans.
This is a terrific misuse of the National Guard. The National Guard is not a law enforcement organization. It is a military reserve organization. The core mission is the defense of the United States of America in battling overseas adversaries. It's not in providing domestic law enforcement. There is a secondary mission to the National Guard, and that is to provide a force for the governors of the states to use under the governor's command and control. For emergencies such as hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, blizzards. Occasionally, the governors also use us for what's called civil disturbance, or sometimes newspapers call it riot control, but it's civil disturbance. But that's pretty infrequent compared to all of our other uses.
As someone who sat in that chair, can you walk me through what the process may look like if someone like President Trump gives those orders to deploy to Chicago, but then someone like J.B. Pritzker, the governor, says, no, I'm not interested in that? What do you do sitting in that chair?
For the president to step in and want to order the National Guard to perform law enforcement, first of all, it doesn't comply with any of the statutes regulating this. You know, military soldiers are trained not to observe the constitutional rights of citizens. They're not trained to make legal arrests. They're not trained to do legal search and seizures. They are trained to break things and kill people. All right. Now, the Pentagon hates it when I say that, but that's what we're trained to do: break things and kill people. So you are taking a blunt force object. You are taking a sledgehammer to do work that is not appropriate for a sledgehammer. They signed up to help their neighbors, help their friends, help their communities, and defend this nation from foreign attack. They didn't sign up to police their fellow citizens. It is not what they do.
And so given that Chicago isn't a federal district like D.C. and there are no riots or protests, however you want to phrase it, like there were in L.A., does getting National Guard deployed to Chicago, is that a much harder legal problem to solve for the Trump administration?
Well, you know, the Supreme Court back in 1837 said that the president has virtually unfettered discretion in using the Insurrection Act. So he could certainly declare the Insurrection Act in effect and take the Illinois National Guard under Title X orders and send them in. But that is subject to, if you will, post-action review, and it could be found that the president was unauthorized in doing so.
Throwing the legality aside, what do you make of the prospect of National Guard troops being deployed to Chicago to control crime?
You know, it's one thing to get called away to deal with an earthquake or a hurricane. It's a whole lot different to get called away to foster some politician's video games. That is not fair to the soldier, and it's a good way to wreck unit morale. It's a good way to really adversely impact retention and recruitment. You get sent away on fruitless missions like this a couple of times, you're going to seriously consider whether or not you're going to stay in for another hitch. And it's sure going to impact the way you talk about being in the National Guard to your buddies who might sign up.
That was the former leader of Illinois' National Guard, Bill Enyart, speaking with St. Louis Public Radio's Will Bauer. To listen to an extended interview, check out the story on stlpr.org. Our Fred Ehrlich edited that piece. The Gateway is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, a listener-supported service of the University of Missouri-St. Louis. Music by Ryan McNeely of Adult Fur. I'm Abby Larico, and from the St. Louis Public Radio newsroom, this has been The Gateway.